יהיו לרצון אמרי פי והגיון ליבי לפניך אדוני צורי וגואלי לפניך. Birth is a beginning, death a destination, but life is a journey, a going and growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity, youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowledge, from foolishness to discretion and then to wisdom, from weakness to strength, strength to weakness, and often back again, from health to sickness, back we pray to health renewed, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, pain to compassion, and from grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until, looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made a journey. Birth is a beginning, death a destination, but life, his life's journey, is and always will be a sacred pilgrimage unto life everlasting. El Harachaman, sweet God, you have taken a beloved friend. Our friends grieve in a world darkened by the loss of their loved one. Norman's life that united them in life, death cannot sever. His companionship shared along life's path, it continues now through the tenderness of memories we will share, memories that surely will bring us joy, happiness, that will always be a precious remembrance. For all these and more, we come here sad, but grateful. Grateful. I invite you to join with me, if you wish, in the recitation of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. Ata imadi, thou art with me. The faith of the psalmist writing those words is echoed today in what I know are the feelings of Norman's family. Ata imadi, thou art with them. And for that, you should only know they are grateful, deeply grateful. I've been asked to announce that at the conclusion of our services here today at Berkowitz-Kumin-Bookatz, we will continue with a service of interment at Mount Olive Cemetery. The family will then receive friends and gather together around the memorial candle and a meal at Anshe Chesed Fairmount Temple, 23737 Fairmount Boulevard in Beechwood. They'll be there today following our services and interment until 6 p.m., pausing to observe Shabbat and continuing tomorrow at 5 p.m. through 9 p.m., also at Fairmount Temple. Friends who wish may contribute, are invited, if you wish, to contribute a gift of tzedakah to Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation or the Alzheimer's Association of Cleveland chapter. The addresses are listed in the death notice in the paper. Of course, you're invited over the coming days and weeks to continue to share your memories, your thoughts, your remembrances. Thank you. for we are not alone. We are not abandoned in the world. We are persons, and so there must exist in this universe an acknowledgement of persons, a presence we call Adonai. We can feel secure here, protected. Each one of our imperfect lives reveals an irreplaceable piece of a holy world. Our lives complex are your caress, O God. Our souls beclouded are your intimates. Miracles surround us every minute of a day, at every corner of a troubled night, are signs of you. In you we find perfect mother love and father caring, which help us to accept our own parents' imperfections and irreplaceable humanity. Life. All life. The beauty, the ugliness, the tragedy and delight is the truth of your existence and its goodness. Thank you for it all. My teacher, Rabbi Richard Levy, wrote that prayer of gratitude, which arises to my heart this final Friday morning of this Jewish year. It's a beautiful idea, don't you think? Whether any of us can embrace the author's total sense of gratitude for life's tragedy alongside its goodness, what is conveyed in these words is the sense we are not alone in the world. There is a presence, an irreplaceable humanity intended for goodness, intended to make us feel more secure. I share this poem today as a means of tribute to Norman Pomerantz. Here was a man with personal presence, a human being who sought and succeeded in making people feel more secure because he was in their life. He let his deeds speak before him and chose when to speak up in a shrewd and careful manner. The truth is, I only met him near the tail end of his life. We connected on occasions of mutual pride, like his grandson Zach's confirmation and graduation at Fairmount Temple. But in the time I've begun to spend with his whole family, I have learned a great deal about his heart and his mind and what it felt like to be protected by his being near. And for this, I'm grateful. I hope I've absorbed a bit of his essence. We gather here today with his children who mourn today the patriarch of their family, Evie and Jimmy, Dave and his Leslie, Michael and Michelle, Richard, and Marlene sending her concern from a distance. To all of you, we offer a deep reservoir of support that you and your parents before you have established in this community. Our shoulders are yours today and in the days going forward as you begin to see your dad's clear legacy. He and you have earned our respect. Our sympathies as well today are with Norm's brother Fred and his Wendy, with Shirley and Al, struck with grief today, but unable to travel. Today, for the very first time and as long as they could remember, they acknowledge the pain they feel at being cut off from his hopeful, caring, empathetic nearness, his inimitable manner, his life and strength as long as life and strength would allow it. Born in the fall of 1931, Norman was the oldest of the three children of Ben and Rose, the values of whose home in the Flatbush neighborhood of Brooklyn will be described quite often today. For he was shaped by the experiences of what had been a recent Great Depression, and in the case of Rose, her having been, as a little girl, a first-generation immigrant. Though he never dwelt on it, Norman could be coaxed into telling you stories of that time. His close relationship growing up with cousins, stickball and handball in Brooklyn streets. His mom prepping the delicious spaghetti and ketchup for dinner. The trip to Stuyvesant High School, which apparently included 2 different trains, a bus ride, and a walk uphill each way. Ultimately, though, the stories that were told were a reflection of his respect for his parents and the struggle they might have had in managing to raise kids in that time, so that he could get to a place to explain how he left childhood determined to do better and to live better, so that when he'd have kids of his own, it wouldn't be such a struggle to make ends meet as it had been for his folks. In that way, he was truly successful. Norman was, all the way back then, extremely bright, inquisitive, curious, quick-witted. After his academic success in high school, his Uncle Izzy made it possible for him to begin his studies at University of Pennsylvania. But the limited resources of the family made it impossible for him to continue his studies at Penn. So he decided to pursue his interest in geology at the University of North Dakota. Somehow the man finagled himself into the purchase of a cheap car that he could drive, or at least he hoped he would drive all the way to the west. Then amazingly, only one state out of Pennsylvania, Norman got it into his head that he had never heard about his potential admission to OSU, so he stopped on a lark in Columbus to find out whatever happened with his candidacy. As legend tells it, the admissions officers told him that he had been rejected. As he began to leave, they stopped him before reaching the door to find out if he was in fact Norman S. Pomerantz, whose admission had been approved but had somehow been discovered right then was stuck to the name of a different Norman Pomerantz that had been rejected. I don't know if that story's true. It really doesn't matter, because perhaps the admissions officer was so impressed with that young man, took him on spec. And that, my friends, is the story of how we all got stuck with a bunch of Buckeye spirit every Saturday. Every Saturday in the fall, from Norman and later his children, some of his children-in-law, relentless Buckeye spirit. For Norman, Ohio State was where he completed his studies in geology and where, more importantly, he met a bunch of guys who became his brothers at the Tep fraternity house, one of whom would later set him up on a blind date that altered the course of his life. On that blind date, he met the one whom his soul adored then until even this day. Fern Saltzman, a Heights High graduate, an ambitious student at Western Reserve with career interests and aspirations for executive leadership, outsized for women of that time. To think Norman at that time in his life could have been way far out of Fern's field of vision in North Dakota. Had he not have had the idea to check in at that OSU admissions office, or the sense to realize later that there weren't very many jobs for young Jewish men in geology, and that he ought to pursue law school, here his life could have been and would have been a very different path. When preparing for Fern's funeral just a few years back, Norman spoke to my colleague, Rabbi Caruso, about that first blind date and how quickly both he and Fern knew that they wanted to make a life together. It was over Thanksgiving weekend in 1956, and it was only a few weeks into 57 when they got married in a very small ceremony in Cleveland's Wade Park with no resources whatsoever to make a big wedding or even a little honeymoon. Those two sweethearts set aside their thoughts and patiently waited to make their entire adult lives together a honeymoon. Norman told Rabbi Caruso how the two of them, once he began to practice law and she broke into a career of her own, excelling in market research and consultancy, they began a lifetime of taking honeymoons by traveling extensively, the two of them, on each other's arm in the Orient, Greece, Alaska, and more. They were that rare couple of people we know whose promise to themselves that they would grab up more of achieving their dreams later were really, truly achieved. They did it. When their children were born, they switched more often to car trips, noisy car trips. But Norman was proud of how they had modeled for their kids a life where each parent excelled and provided, where they carried on being frugal with their resources while also modeling generosity of time and support and substance to their kids' educations to the interests of their kids and grandkids, and for progressive causes and groups identified with making this community more just and more fair. In Norman's case, he became a provider by building, client by client, lead by lead, a substantial law practice in personal injury. He pretty much did it from scratch, and because he was willing to reach out and establish relationships through word of mouth to people who were in the auto repair and collision business. He was dedicated to serving his clients, was a prepared litigator if he had to go to court, earning him an excellent and respected legal reputation. According to his kids their dad wasn't quite as good at on-the-spot negotiations with the ticket scalpers outside the games of Cleveland's beloved sports teams. At a later stage in life, Fern and Norman found residence in the Caribbean island of St. Kitts, and for a while, in retirement, made their lives and their friendships and their art-filled home in West Palm Beach. In a few moments, each of his kids will come to this lectern and share what I assure you will be hilarious memories of this man. But I do want to say that when we sat a few days ago in my study at Fairmount Temple to talk about Norman Pomerantz, every one of them spoke about the human qualities that made him who he was. He told me of a man who was deeply loyal, humble, dedicated to his family, and protective. Evie spoke of his deep feelings, both about the people he loved and others he might not have known, but who he felt were being treated unfairly or with prejudice. Michael remembers the two different dad looks growing up. There was the slick, put-together, just-so, dapper-looking Daily Norman, and then there was his dad on the weekend, who did not put together an outfit with any semblance of order. Richard remembers his dad telling him that whatever you do, you should be prepared to act as though what you did will be on the front page of the newspaper. David told me that his respect for his dad, his love for his family is deep, that he'll carry that forward along with what characterized his relationship as a son up until this day, which is never wanting to disappoint his dad or reflect poorly on all he had been given. All of them remember their dad's lap as a space in which, throughout their lives, they could sit and watch a game or a program and know they were held, protected, and never alone. That's really something. Norman would have marked an 87th birthday a month from today. And although the last few years since Fern's death included frailty and weakness, he was grateful to have made it this far in life, which, given the obstacles he faced, was not a lock. This was a prostate cancer survivor for 17 years. Truly, all the way to his death, he won his battle with cancer. Norman was also a military veteran, and the Army service could have put him into harm's way. He was someone whose life could have been cut short or diminished by a vehicle crash that affected the cervical portion of his spine. Beating back each of these obstacles with his grit made possible a full life of accomplishment for both him and Fern in their educational, personal, and familial achievements. There is a Jewish teaching going back to the 1st century. Rabbi Hillel taught, "B'makom she'ein anashim," in a place without humanity, "Hishtadel lihiyot ish." Be a man. Be humane. Be principled. This type of ideal captured the sense of purpose with which Norman carried himself. This Jewish idea, along with getting his kids a Jewish education, or the tradition of hiding the afikomen in the very same place, beneath the napkin on his lap for years, were the main things left over from what had been an upbringing that included orthodoxy and Jewish practice. He appreciated his role as the patriarch of the family. Indeed, Norman would have wanted, though, to be clear today that after knowing many different individuals in all kinds of eras in American life since the 30s, the people he admired most were the ones that he expected to see the next 30s, the people we know as his grandkids. Amanda, Brian, Corey, Kathy, Jack, Rachel, Sam, Matthew, Andrew, and Zach. For them, Grandpa's passing marks the end of an era. Zach says Grandpa thought the world of his grandchildren. And the death that we come here to remember today brings back all the ways that their grandma and grandpa represented a kind of humanity that is rare in this world. Jack sent me a note by email yesterday to say that going forward he'll be carrying many memories of his grandpa, including going to the Science Museum and on a trip to Detroit. He remembers the way Grandpa would watch, help, critique the tower he or his cousins might be building with the brightly wood-colored blocks at Grandma and Grandpa's house. He remembers going to shake Grandpa's hand and the way Norman would crush your knuckles to make you both laugh. Jack remembers watching TV with Norman in the family room and when Grandma and Grandpa lived in Aurora, how his grandfather got him interested in wrestling while rolling around on the floor. Zach posted last night to Facebook an awesome little story and a reminder to his friends about how we all should remember to take our grandpas out to breakfast. He recalls a breakfast 5 years ago that he and his brother took their grandfather out to Jack's Deli. Norman had been living alone for a little while, and Zach remembers how excitedly his grandpa ordered a black coffee and a double order of bacon. He did that so that the rabbi would have to say a double order of bacon. This breakfast stands out to Zach because it inhabited a very brief intersection of time where I was old enough to appreciate my grandpa's company, and he was still mentally sharp enough to tell me stories of his childhood in Brooklyn, meeting Grandma, and his military service. Andrew wrote to me to say that although he can't be here, among the things he'll be holding to are ear pulls and nudges and hair tussles and, of course, cow bites, which will be explained shortly. Andrew says Grandpa made sure things were never boring. There was always a second away from a good laugh. Grandpa was stubborn, he says, prideful in his grandchildren. There was an epic debate where we had to decide whether Corey should play college lacrosse for a top 10 team in the nation, with no practice, of course. We all, including Corey, protested, but all Grandpa could say is, of course he can play, he runs like a deer. And that is how he said deer. Andrew added he will never forget trips with Grandpa to Comerica Park and Detroit, to New York, to Cooperstown. He says he wasn't always in the best physical shape to handle the travel, but he gutted it out for our benefit. I remember him having an admirable balance of silliness to lighten a mood, but also seriousness when there was something to be learned. I think my avid sports fandom and the way I watch a game comes partly from Grandpa. He experienced the roller coaster of emotions in the game to its fullest extent, exasperated at poor performances, you bum, and thrilled at success. It was always a special experience to watch the Browns or the Indians with Grandpa. He then says, I think he was the patriarch that I'd like to be one day. A fierce family man, a tough guy, who never let the numerous bad hands in life get to him, get in the way of him enjoying and to the fullest being around for the good times. That's a pretty awesome legacy. Like that quote I shared from Rabbi Hillel, I hear Andrew interpreting in a place or a life that deals you numerous bad hands, gut it out. Lighten the mood, experience the emotion, be fierce, and live to the fullest. In these and many other ways, all who carry on in the spirit of Norman Pomerantz will have purpose and integrity that matches a very good man, from whom we can learn a great deal about capacity, about ferocity at beating back obstacles, and about dignity, with which he lived and with which he has recently died. Zecher Tzadik Livracha, may the memory of this righteous human being bless us always. As together we say, Amen. At this time, I'd like to call on Norman's children to explain their rascal of a dad to us all.
What do you say about the man who taught you how to hit a baseball, how to ride a bike, how to drive, how to shave, how to tie a tie, and how to be a lawyer? Dad was a larger-than-life figure. First, he was just large, a big and strong guy, and his size made you feel safe in his care and made for a great lap to sit in. And then there was that Brooklyn accent that he never seemed to shake, even though he lived many more decades in Cleveland than he did in New York. And of course, that oversized cigar that he was invariably chomping on. My most vivid memory of Dad will always be of him coaching the Browns from his recliner. And when the game was close, pacing the sidelines of our family room. We often joked that we should replace the rug with AstroTurf for him. Dad loved the Cleveland Browns, the Brooklyn Dodgers, hot weather, the hotter the better, Dewar's white label scotch, convertible sports cars, the state of Israel, his kids, his grandkids, and a woman named Fern. Mom and Dad met on a blind date and had a whirlwind romance, getting married just 3 months later, in January, in Cleveland. I didn't come along for another 3 years, so I wasn't the reason. I think it was like that line from When Harry Met Sally. When you realize that you want to spend the rest of your life with someone, you want the rest of your life to start as soon as possible. After Mom passed, he dreamed of her and regularly asked about her, whether she would be coming to family events. Whether or not he knew she was gone is to ask the wrong question, because in his heart, she remained very much alive. Dad's was a life well lived. He was well-read, well-traveled, beloved by 4 children and 10 grandchildren, and an astute observer of politics and world events. Although I remember late in his life visiting him in assisted living and telling him that Donald Trump had won the election, he gave me one of his patented, "Oh, come on." And he gave me this look as if I had told him that Donald Duck had been elected president. Dad was my mentor. He patiently and proudly showed me the ropes and gave me helpful criticism and endless encouragement. And he was a great lawyer, always well prepared, with an ability to synthesize complex issues of law, medicine, and engineering. Opposing lawyers who underestimated them, and there were many, did so at their peril. He helped the lives of so many grievously injured people, none more so than an 18-year-old Heights High grad who was rendered a paraplegic in a motorcycle accident. Dad stood toe-to-toe with Kawasaki Motors and won the largest product liability verdict ever in the state of Ohio at the time. But no story of Dad is complete without marveling at his greatest battle, his fight against prostate cancer. He not only became his own advocate, he became an expert in the field. Each year he traveled to the International Urology Convention in San Diego to learn about cutting-edge treatments, where he often knew more than the physicians attending. He sought out treatment at the Cleveland Clinic, and when they had no more to offer him, the University of Virginia, Orlando, Florida, and the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. His goal was to die of something other than prostate cancer. And Dad, you did it. Right after Dad was diagnosed, and I guess he was in the bargaining stage, he said to me, just give me 10 more years. That was nearly 26 years ago. He was blessed in that time to see his grandchildren grow up, go to school, and make their way in the world. And I have been blessed to be his son, his law partner, and then his caregiver. So while there is a norm-sized hole in our hearts today, there is no unfinished business. Although Dad sometimes had trouble expressing his emotions, we knew he loved us, and he knew we loved him. He left this life that he cherished so much with a full heart.
Death, be not proud. Find no glory in your conquest. My father did not succumb to you. He fought your icy grip with every last breath. You can take the long-suffering flesh of Norman Pomerantz, for we will all soon forget the shell of a body you claimed, and remember the once energetic sparkle and vibrant smile of a man who loved the wonders of life and the opportunities it afforded. To me, he was a teacher, a provider, and a protector. More than just offering material things, he demonstrated by example unflinching ethics. He demanded that we act truthfully and honorably. He stood up to those who would do us harm without sheltering us from life's harsh realities. He took the time to coach our baseball team, to explain the infield fly rule, and instruct us what to do when there's a man on first and third and one out. During one of our many backyard training sessions, he suddenly reared back and started heaving blazing line drives at Dave and me. We glanced at each other knowing we were completely incapable of fielding these zingers. Why was he doing this? We could get seriously hurt. I later realized it was a survivalist lesson. Be prepared. Sometimes life throws fastballs straight at your head. You can get hit, jump out of the way, or rise to the occasion, and with practice, gain the confidence and skill to meet the challenges straight on. Dad wanted us to be tough. It's a hard thing to teach your kids. You want them to be sweet and kind. But in that era, a father's job was to teach you how to make it in a dangerous and uncertain world. Norman was a peaceful and nonviolent man, but he wanted us to expect the world to give us nothing we didn't earn and to be wary of those who would try and cheat us out of what was rightfully ours. Which is kind of funny because he gave me so much. I would be embarrassed to account for all the help he has provided my entire life. He was driven to succeed. He was certain that study and hard work would be rewarded. He spent his time here on earth seeking justice for those in dire straits and great need, the injured and the cast-offs of our community. Sadly for those efforts, he often garnered the sneers and derision of politicians and comedians whose careless jabs stung his heart. He was a man who started life with very little but the love of family. For all the distances he traveled and all he accumulated along the way, he left this world with little else but the love of family. He could be a taciturn man who had trouble expressing joy or emoting sorrow, but he had a generous heart. He would quietly, without fanfare, write a check to help someone out or spend hours handing out free legal advice to friends and family. Then came the diagnosis, because sometimes life throws fastballs straight at your head. He was devastated. He briefly crumbled. But he knew you never give up. When the doctor said, "We have nothing left to do for you," you never give up. When the medicine stops working, you never give up. When the experimental treatment is outlawed, you never give up. The fact that he didn't live forever was not for a lack of effort on his part. He would sacrifice anything for another year. He wanted to watch his grandkids grow up. He might not have been warm and fuzzy. He didn't easily toss out praise or expressions of joy. But he taught us that life is a precious gift to be cherished and protected. When I was 19 and Dave was 20, they reinstated the draft. It was only 5 years after the fall of Saigon. Unsure what to do, I asked my dad. 25 years earlier, his country called and he answered. 65 years after his service, I never take off his dog tag. Though Dad was a patriot and a veteran, my question presented an uncomfortable choice for him. After some thought, he told me to register for the draft, but added, "If they come for you, you come to me." I nodded my head in understanding. If I was going to be sent to the next Vietnam, he would find a loophole or an alternative, or for all I knew, even give me money to go to Canada to avoid another militaristic misadventure. They come for you, you come to me. He never would abandon us. I faced some tough times, as everyone does sooner or later. Dad was right about that. But you never give up. You don't go down without a fight. He's no longer here for me to consult. He hasn't been able to protect me for some time now. But I have no fear of what lies ahead because I am tough, because I am not afraid of the fastballs, because my dad taught me how to catch.
Story of my life, following these two. Yeah, okay. Thanks, guys. All right, how many of you know what a cow bite is? If you knew Dad, you knew that this is how a large, quiet, yet sentimental man showed his love. He took his hand and he grabbed that part of your leg where the fat of your inner thigh met your inner knee, and he squeezed hard. And it hurt. We would groan and we begged him and then laugh for him to stop. And I can still see the look of mischievous joy on his face. My dad was a tease and a nudge. Although she didn't have that accent, but it sounded that way. My response, of course, was, like, ew. But inside, I knew what she meant. Jimmy and Dad were a lot alike. Smart, quiet, unassuming, hardworking, loyal men who spoke only when they had something of significance to say, who loved their family unconditionally, who loved all sports, and of course, a good meal. But men who also knew what times to step up and take the reins, and when to step back and let their gregarious, strong wives run the show. Growing up with 3 brothers and no sisters, it was not unusual for me to hear, "I'll bet you're your daddy's little girl." And I got to tell you, I really hated that because it felt like people were saying that I was spoiled or that maybe he was softer with me with the rules than he was with my brothers, and that just wasn't the case at our house. Just as I had had a different relationship with my mom by virtue of being the only daughter, my relationship with my dad was indeed very, very special. I remember this one time I was in high school. I had a crush on a boy, and he called me one night on our phone, which was, on the wall in the kitchen in front of everyone. And when I hung up, I announced to my parents that he had asked me out. And my mom, shared my excitement, and Dad peered over the newspaper, and he said, "Is he Jewish?" I was like, "Dad, no, but it's not like I'm going to marry him." To which he said, "No, not if you don't date him, you won't." I can argue with that. Years later, shortly after I married my wonderful Jewish husband, Dad grilled me. "When are you going to have kids?" So I said, "Dad, we just got married. We're young. We need to establish ourselves, earn money." And he looked at me and he pointed his finger and he goes, "If your mother and I had that attitude, you wouldn't be here." That was my dad. He didn't say a lot, But when he did, he didn't mince words. And even though a lot of those words were usually in Yiddish, you knew what he meant. And with his thick New York accent, he really had no idea just how funny he was. Dad, where's Mom? I don't know, she's out schleigering. When they put a traffic light where there used to be a stop sign at an intersection by our house. Oy, they need that like a Lachen cup. Cheaters were Ganefs, cold weather was Bena, his troubles were Tsuris. And an expression supposed to be said in love, okay, wait, I'm going to say it wrong all of a sudden. Gesund of dein Puppik, a blessing on your belly button, was always said sarcastically. Dad, I'm going out. Geh gesund. This is my dad. And I loved to mimic him and all of his Brooklyn relatives. And my mom, she was my best audience. I'm telling you, she seriously laughed hysterical. She egged it on. But my dad would just shake his head and look at me and say, you're making chizuk on your family. So let me tell you what it was like being Norm's only daughter. On special occasions, I received roses, signed from an admirer. He took me to the symphony and the theater. When it was my turn to go to work with him on Saturday mornings, in addition to sitting in the front seat of whatever convertible he was currently driving, he would drive down Prospect Avenue so that we could see the working girls. Don't tell Mom, he would say, as if it was our little secret. He danced with me. When I was little, I remember it was on top of his feet. And when I was a teen at one of our pool parties, he grabbed me and taught me to jitterbug in front of everyone. And then at my wedding, it was, of course, the traditional father-daughter dance. And I think he did it not because he was a great dancer. I think he did it because it would make my mom verklempt and just love him just a little bit more. One time when I was a little girl, he ran up a down-going escalator, 3 steps at a time, to get me because everyone else had already gone down, and I was afraid to go by myself. He rushed in my bedroom and held me tight when the fire alarm he was tinkering with went off. And he told me, it's okay, I'm here. He encouraged my love of singing and theater by happily paying for voice lessons, applying to theater school, and then suggesting maybe I open up a singing restaurant. He encouraged joining a sorority when my mom thought it was frivolous. And when I didn't take care of a traffic ticket, he told me it would serve me right to spend a night in jail. It was Dad, not my mom, who allowed the Pepper Pike 16-year-old girl rite of passage nose job. He cried when he saw me in my wedding gown. And then he followed up by saying he just didn't think he could walk me down the aisle and would I mind holding him up. He would race over to my house when I just could not console a colicky baby. And then he gently calmed us both down. He told everyone that if you want something done, give it to Evie. But he never told me that to my face. Instead, he would tease, he would nudge, and then he'd give me a cow bite.
I only want to talk briefly. I'm sure my brothers and sister talked longer than they were supposed to. So, when I was really young, I had this notion that my dad probably didn't know my name. Maybe other youngest children in the room can understand what I'm talking about. I don't know why I thought this. Perhaps it was whenever he called my name, it was David Michael Richard. The idea that he couldn't come up with my name, only after he cycled through the other names would he remember my name. But I was sure that one night at dinner, he would point to me and turn to my mom and say, "Fern, who is this kid?" Then something happened that made me realize that he did know my name. I would often go to the office on the weekend like my other siblings had before me. And I would play with the little cars they had in the library, which would, the little cars they would use to show how accidents happened and everything. I assume that's what they were for. Yeah. Then one day I went into my dad's office and I sat in his chair. I'd never really done that before. There were many pictures behind the desk, but only one was facing him on the desk. And it was me, proudly holding up this tiny little fish that I had caught. And it was then that I realized that he not only knew my name, but he loved me. And while working away, he would look up and he would see me. And Many years later, I remember taking a picture with my dad when I graduated from medical school. And my dad had such a proud look on his face. And it may have been one of the happiest days of my life, well, aside from when I got married and when I had my kids. But it wasn't that my dad didn't compliment us or encourage us. He did. It was a great day because I made him happy. The funny thing is, even as I was writing this yesterday, I realized that he was proud of us all, and we were regularly making him happy. And that's how I want to remember him. I love you, Dad.
Growing up, my dad would tell me from time to time, Brian, you are the eldest son of an eldest son of an eldest son. So naturally, when I was a little kid, I used to think, if only Grandpa were a king, then someday I would be one too. But as I got older, I began to see my situation more as a sacred responsibility. From the stories I've heard from my dad about my grandpa's life as a lawyer, I've come to understand that Grandpa cared deeply about fairness and justice. He fought for the little guy, the disenfranchised, and the downtrodden. Every such story my dad would tell began, Grandpa used to say, or Grandpa always taught me, and followed with some token of wisdom. And so it was clear to me that Grandpa had always had an innate understanding of what was right and what was moral. While I am not a lawyer, like my father or his father before him, I have taken these teachings to heart. In my own life, I often try and ask myself, what would Grandpa have done? I try to seek justice for those who have had none, knowing Grandpa would have stood for nothing less. And I know that someday it will be my responsibility to teach my sons and daughters the same, to explain to them how we must help those less fortunate and able than ourselves, just as my grandpa taught his children and grandchildren, as well as everyone in this room today. But I also want to tell you not about the man I grew to admire from stories and legends, but the Grandpa I knew personally. With his grandchildren, Grandpa was quite the jokester. He was infamous for his cow bites. He loved picking us up by our ears, and given the size of our ears, it must have been pretty easy. He taught all his grandchildren the game where you try and slap the other person's hands, and would always chuckle when he would get us to flinch. Every Passover, Grandpa would hide the afikomen under the tablecloth right in front of him. I imagine he took delight in seeing us grandchildren running around the house looking for something right in front of us. Or maybe he just knew that, being too short to reach the table on our feet, we would have to climb onto his lap to get under the tablecloth, making us perfect targets for a classic Grandpa hug. He could switch between these two roles seamlessly. And that's what I loved most about Grandpa, that we could be out on the dock by the lake in Walden, and 1 minute he was almost king-like, explaining to his princes and princesses what it meant to be a good citizen, a good leader, and a good person. And the next minute, you were just two friends, sitting on a bench in the wilderness, feeding the ducks, laughing, and making good conversation. Grandpa, our friend and role model, on behalf of all the grandchildren, we miss you and we love you always.
I think I can speak for us all when I say, if there's someone who could make a singing restaurant go, it's Evie. I invite you all to please rise. El male rachamim shochen במרומים חמצי מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה עם קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזכירים את נשמע ניסן בן ברוך ורזר שהלך לעולמו בעל הרחמים יוסתירהו, בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen. God full of compassion, eternal spirit in the universe, grant rest now. Rest in your sheltering presence to Norman Pomerantz, who has lived with goodness and now entered eternity. God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings. Let his soul be bound up in the bonds of everlasting life. You are his inheritance and he yours. May he rest in peace.